Greetings. Welcome back to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagano, and welcome here to another fun-filled, action-packed episode of Iowa's favorite conservative podcast. I am joined here in studio today with everyone's favorite John Hendrickson, who has copious amounts of notes ready to go. You always know it's going to be a fun episode when John comes fully prepared.
Yes, yeah, I have a lot of notes today.
He's got a lot on his mind today. Yeah. And Chris Ingstad's here, armed with a fresh Coke Zero, ready for action. So,
you know what? I think the listeners understand that John shows up fully prepared with lots of notes, and I show up with a can of Coke. And
to be fair, is fully prepared, right?
This is as prepared as I'm going to be for this. Okay. And I think the output of what we have to offer, I think it's clear who was prepared and who just brought a can of pop. So.
Okay, I don't want to undersell the importance of coming armed with a Coke Zero. So I was going to mention that we have a new sponsor today, but then I realized who he'd be in competition with for that product. And do either of you own a Liberty safe?
No, I do not.
For your firearms?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Have you followed the story, Chris?
No.
Okay. Well, John and I have. So Liberty Safe, apparently, I don't know how prominent, but a successful supplier of gun safes in America was cooperating with the FBI in their searches of January 6th defendants.
That ought to go over well with a lot of firearms owners.
And so they were able to actually provide the gun safe codes, like the actual combinations for the master combination to unlock the safes for the feds to come in and look for guns for January 6th defendants.
Did they willingly do that, or were they compelled by subpoena or other court order?
That's where it gets a little murky here. They tried to say, well, they had a search warrant, but then it was like, well, we always cooperate with the government. And they've since, obviously tremendous backlash here, have since backpedaled and said, we're going to change our policy. Anyone can remove these, apparently a master password or lock where they can unlock it at any time, which I think is troubling, right? I mean, Apple Computer is notoriously will not provide that to the government. There have been high-profile criminal investigations where they would not unlock someone's phone, and saying that is not something that we do or able to do or anything. But your gun safe, which is sort of the foundation of our freedom from tyrannical government, sure, just go ahead and unlock that when the FBI comes calling. No problem, right, John? How do the folks in the Iron Range going to feel about this one?
They're not going to like it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. There's a lot going on, especially in, Iowa, central Iowa. And I don't know that we have touched on this one before, guys, but Des Moines City Councilwoman Indira Shoemaker finally resigned her spot after presumably vacating the position, and is no longer on the Des Moines City Council. You and I were talking about this earlier, John, the article in the Des Moines Register. Give us a little flavor of that one about this.
Well, I didn't read the full article, but basically it talked about the dilemma that public officials are increasingly facing with anxiety and mental pressures, and so it was I would say I don't know, is it too politically correct to say it was a interesting take on that story?
Look, obviously, she was the darling of the radical left coming into that, was able to beat a long time entrenched incumbent, and was, a very a leftist radical. She was very involved with BLM protests back in that, I guess, 2020, and really captured,
I remember the Register wrote a very glowing piece about, boy, she is one to watch, and we're excited about what she's going to bring to the council. Change. It sounds like she brought no more to the council than I brought to the podcast. I mean, maybe a can of pop.
Well, and I think my point is, I do not want to diminish at all the reality of mental health challenges that many people face in our society. And they are real. Yes.
If it is mental health or otherwise health related, that's a little different story. Although even then, as an elected official, you have a duty to either communicate that to your constituents, to your fellow members, or otherwise say I can't represent anymore. I need to do something.
And that's really where I think this becomes troubling is. for a long time. Look, she had not attended a city council meeting. Her attendance had been sporadic at best and had not attended one at all since March 6th and had stopped responding to emails a week after that. So we're talking 6 months now that she has just completely, the mayor, the council, nobody knew where she even was, other than some cryptic rumors and a couple of notes from her dad or something. Fine. If you're struggling like that, just let the mayor or the city administrator know, hey, guys, I got some real challenges. I'm going to be doing this. And also, I would say, whatever those are, when you enter into public office, I mean, there is, the public trust, I think, it expects something a little bit more in terms of transparency out of you. So that bothers me too, that she just said, heck with everyone, I'm going to go. And I don't care what anyone says or thinks. It just seems exceedingly selfish. Then what we were talking about in the pre-production meeting, John, is this article from the Des Moines Register. Now, and I noticed some of our friends at KCCI, for example, it's like they just couldn't bring themselves to be critical of it. They would state the fact that she hadn't been to a council meeting, but just couldn't quite get so far as to say that maybe that was bad. They might report that some of her constituents were frustrated, but it's just the kid gloves with which they consistently treated this story. And my question to you, John, is if that were a movement conservative that had stolen a seat on the Des Moines City Council and then had this record in office, how does that article read in the Des Moines Register? Even if that person had claimed mental health
it would be a lot different. In fact, I think this just shows the level of bias we see in the media against how Republicans, conservatives are treated versus liberals and progressives. And there's multiple examples we could look at the local and national level of the bias of media. And so definitely if this had been a conservative individual, Republican individual that did the same thing, the media would be handling this totally differently.
I agree with that, and I actually think there's something a little more interesting too. If this had been a long-time establishment Democrat, the kind that have typically run things in Des Moines and Polk County, I think they still would have even been a little bit more critical of that sort of person. I think that the real soft treatment of this is because this was the beloved darling of the far left that we are not able to criticize.
Yeah.
We cannot. It's off limits.
Yeah.
And therefore then that element gets a free pass on anything they say or do.
We see that dynamic with campaigns and candidates and races at all levels, right? And you fall in love with the personality, with the idea, with the potential of somebody who hasn't actually maybe proven themselves, haven't actually shown they've got the ability to do this, right? And so you fall in love with the personality, and then you're left with maybe only the personality, right? And you end up being disappointed or buyer's remorse or anything else. And I think there's caution there on voters. Is like, no matter what race you're looking at, and yes, we hope we find somebody who we can agree with, right? Regardless of anything else, we hope we find somebody we can be enthused about. We hope we find somebody that we think has charisma. But we also need to make sure we're finding somebody who's got sort of a demonstrated ability to do the job.
I think that's right. And at some level, I like that someone can generate enough, whether they agree with me or not, enough on the ground grassroots energy that it's not just about, the traditional order of things in campaigns and elections. They can just go out and kind of bootstrap their way to a win. Yeah. Like that's a good thing. That's populism.
Those things are good and necessary. Yes. And regardless of which side of the political aisle you're on, that's good because it moves your side. Advances your side, right? It gives it a boost and propels them, and that is good. But that doesn't necessarily mean that person is the one who actually will be sitting in the seat of government.
Correct.
Look at that, and look at just look at the media and how they handle President Biden. Just imagine if it was President Trump in office and you had the devastating fire in Hawaii or the hurricane, and Trump was vacationing on the beach and basically did nothing.
Yeah.
And how the media asked these softball questions during the daily press conferences, and just substitute one of Trump's children for Hunter Biden and look at
John, we have an example of this. Do you remember the left and the media's criticism of President Bush on his response to Katrina because he didn't land?
Yes. Yeah.
The picture of him looking out and then flew away.
Yeah.
When he was under, he did that to make it easier for the relief efforts on the ground and not get in their way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But yet he didn't care. And the entire narrative, which they knew was completely bogus, that didn't matter because they had a story to tell.
Yeah.
No, we know exactly how this would be if this were a Republican in office, especially if it were the dastardly Donald Trump and not Joe Biden, who goes on vacation after vacation and won't even answer the question about what he thinks about what's going on in these things.
But in fairness to the president, I don't know that he knows what's going on. So
well,
we shouldn't expect him to have an opinion.
You said it, not me. Okay, well, all right.
That comment was out of bounds?
No,
okay.
no, not at all.
Right.
I'm just saying, like, we could
He
sit here
seems
for
on
the
top
rest
of it to me.
We could sit here for the rest of the afternoon and bang on the media and bias and reporting and double standards. That's always fun stuff. So, so the other thing that John and I were talking about earlier today.
Why does nobody talk to me about any of these things?
You were busy doing important leadership things around here, and we were just doing pre-production for the people, because that's really what it comes back to for John and I is the people and the listeners.
Conservative populists.
Yeah,
that's right. So yesterday at the state capitol was the public hearing on boards and commissions, and so part of the governor's government reorganization streamlining was to take a look at the very long list of boards and commissions we have inside of state government and see what we need and what we don't. There's a recommendation and then the public hearing on that recommendation. So, John, you and I know you're working on more analysis of this. So we're going to jump the gun a little bit today because there are some things that are interesting in here. But what are you looking at? Because that's we talked about all the notes you got, and that's a big part of it right here.
Well, they make some good recommendations, but I just wanted to share some of the boards that they are.
We're not talking about the Board of Regents
here.
No. Or the Board of Medicine here.
And so what the objective here is part of the which I think was may have been one of the best bills coming out of this session, was a governor's reorganization bill, which right sizes government, making it more efficient. And so they're proposing to eliminate and consolidate 100 boards and commissions, and some of these I didn't even know existed. For example, the one is the Capital Planning Commission that's proposed to be eliminated, the Athletic Training Board, the Dental Hygiene Commission, the Dietetics
That
Board
one's got to go. I've been working on that for a long time.
The Elevator Safety Board eliminated.
So John, so under this, we're not going to care about the safety of elevators.
That's right.
What this is?
And here's another one.
I should
Fire
have.
Extinguishing System Contractors and Alarm Systems Advisory Board, and one the Hearing Aid Specialist Board, are just a few of these.
My sense is, correct me if I'm wrong, and I need to not use sarcasm, facetiousness. Getting rid of the elevator safety board is not saying we don't care about elevators. Just the responsibility for that supervision or whatever will go to another board, right?
It's just going to be governed someplace else. Do we need a whole dedicated board that gets together?
Do we need another whole structure of people? And
well, now some of these, like I said about the dietetics board, there's a national board that sits on top of that too, with duplicative. My wife's a dietitian and has to jump through all these hoops on both of them. Yeah. The requirements are sort of similar in content, but the actual reporting periods are all different, and it's all an exercise in full employment for whatever bureaucrat or whatever board wants to create these new hoops. It doesn't do anything to advance the profession. And that goes for a whole bunch of these professional licensures. They don't exist to advance the profession.
The goal here is, and this is their first recommendation, which I agree with, is basically what they want to do is establish an ongoing review process for all boards and commissions, including meaningful enforcement of sunrise and sunset provisions, to make sure that, one, these boards are actually needed or commissions are needed, and one, they're actually doing the intended work. And so I think what they're trying to do is not, as you said, they don't want to have poor elevators installed in buildings, but it's just to make sure that there's not duplication of stuff in terms of what state departments are doing.
Right. You still have regulation of regulated industries and efforts.
Yeah.
It's just the governance of it and trying to make it work a little bit better. The other thing that came out of some of this and reading some of the news articles of this, because, it rewind for those folks out there that haven't been to the Capitol when something like this is happening, usually during the legislative session, but it's quite the show, right? You have a public hearing.
That's why I was kind of giggling to myself as John was reading these things, just astonished, as if he's shocked these things even exist. And I was like, well, you haven't been to a subcommittee, John. Because you will find interest groups coming out of the woodwork at those. Again, interest groups you didn't even know existed, but they will be there and telling you, this is the end of the world, this does or does not happen.
Anytime you have a meaningful reform, the hordes descend on the Capitol so they can tell their story about how critical these things are, and life as we know it will come to an end if we don't have the fire extinguishing device safety board governed by this board. It's absurd, but yet we got to put on the show because everybody's got to have their say, and fine. But go ahead.
So the first finding was very interesting, and this is what they said: Iowa's administrative state will continue to grow without an effective mechanism to review boards and commissions. And it reminded me of a quote I read by President Herbert Hoover once, where he basically said that if you're not careful, government's going to grow. It grows like a weed. It just keeps. You have to keep pruning that, and that's the purpose of this reorganization is to.
And in those intervening 90 or 100 years since I'm guessing that he said that, government has grown like a weed and has done all these things and hasn't been pruned. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do around here is start the process of pruning it back.
Yeah.
And underneath all of this is a real philosophical difference about the role of government in our society. Many of these comments that were coming from these different boards, and they weren't all trade sorts of things. Some of them were the Commission on Latino Affairs or something is like, well, you want Latinos in it. Well, okay, that's not the issue here. The issue is whether I need government to somehow engineer who lives here or our migration patterns or something. Maybe it could happen without government involved. And so,
but in fact, Chris, we're not even saying that government can't be involved. We're saying that each one of these things don't need a hierarchy and a structure put over the top of it.
Sure.
That's as far as we're going.
Right. Yeah. It's a modest step forward. But this idea that government is the author of all things that are good, that move society forward. And I could not agree less with that notion. And so structures and these are the weeds, right? Yeah. All the layers of government that we put over top of these things that don't serve anyone. There may be some good things that come out of it, but simply asking for some efficiency through that process is somehow just out of bounds. It makes no sense. The governor should be commended for leading this effort and to make these things. It's our duty to the taxpayers and the citizens he represents to get these services delivered in the most efficient way possible.
We spent a lot of time on this program talking about local government. And I think what the governor is doing at the state level is a good example for all local elected officials, where you not only as the governor led on pro-growth tax reform and controlling spending, but also right-sizing government, making it more efficient, more responsible to the taxpayers. And that's a lesson that can be applied locally as well.
And nationally.
Especially nationally. Yeah. Yes.
All right. Next issue, John. We talked. Another one that you brought to my attention this morning was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal.
Yes.
that
Yeah.
I'm going to let you.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you have the floor for this one too.
Well, this was interesting. I could talk for hours on this because I think it's an important debate.
I'm not sure we have
And,
hours left in the podcast.
Yeah. But former Vice President Mike Pence had an op-ed this morning in the Wall Street Journal arguing that basically beware, Republicans should reject populism. And that, and he also, I think today, gave a speech to this regard at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, saying that populism is a poison and it's a siren song for Republicans. And
now, before we go any further,
What does that mean?
well, that's why I want to flesh that out a little bit, though, because give us the short version of what is populism.
Well, populism is basically a political philosophy from the left or right that appeals to the common person.
So the government.
Yes, yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, to the people, and so Pence, basically, he says that Republicans need to go back to limited government, free enterprise, free markets, internationalism, and he does make some good things that we would agree with. For example, that our rights come from God, and and the importance of federalism. But here's what he said in his speech today in New Hampshire Institute of Politics. And I'm quoting now, and this is from the USA Today, who did a story on this. When Donald Trump ran for president in 2016, he promised to govern as a conservative, and together we did, Pence said. But it's important for Republicans to know that he and his imitators in this Republican Party make no such promise today. And so my question to Vice President Pence then is, are you rejecting, you're taking credit for your achievements, but now you're saying not. And as far as I know, President Trump is not campaigning any differently than he did in 2016. Right. But the point I want to make, Chris, is not leave Trump out of this. And I applaud Vice President Pence for bringing this, because I think it's an important debate for us conservatives to have. But whether you want to call it populism, America First conservatism, or conservative nationalism, here's what made me angry with what he said, because he says that populists on the right are progressives. That's not true. You can look at, in fact, they're saying today, like, President Trump and Vivek are examples of what they call new right conservatism. I don't like that term, because I would say it's old right. Vice President Pence must have failed history, because, I can show him example after example of conservatives. For example, Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, that not only supported limited government, but they supported policies of protective tariffs, a restrained foreign policy. Calvin Coolidge, that free market people love.
This is
I want to get
this is the problem with a lot of the Republican Party and the established Republican Party at its highest levels is, again, when they've actually gone away from truly conservative principles. But who are they out there for? I think back to Donald Trump, and again, it's worth saying every time, I don't say this as a Trump apologist or anything else, but people like Trump because they believed that he fought for them and he was looking out for them. And I would further say that the people who are drawn to Ron DeSantis at this moment are drawn to him because they see him as a fighter and somebody who's willing to take things on. Instead, it sounds like Mike Pence is pitching more Mitt Romney style Republican stuff, and that was rejected by voters years ago, and frankly doesn't resonate anymore and seems out of touch.
Let's look at
in a lot of ways we've come back to your point, John, to sort of the roots of a more modern conservative philosophy, and Pence and others are trying to jam in some level of like neocon, and we see the same, John. We see the same thing from not from a fiscal or economic standpoint, but from a foreign policy standpoint, when a bunch of folks are being hawks wanted us to be involved in Ukraine, and you're going, have you not learned any lessons lately, people?
Look at the record of the neoconservatives since the 1990s when they controlled the Republican Party. Foreign wars that we've lost, massive government spending and deficits. We failed to maintain our borders. We don't manufacture anything again because we bought into their globalist free trade ideas that outsourced all of our manufacturing. Crime is on the rise, and I agree we need to limit spending. But Vice President Pence, where were you with George W. Bush? one was striking balances with Ted Kennedy to expand the Department of Education and grow entitlements, and so you know,
the analysis of Republican leadership at the national level over the last 20, 30 years, that is all fair to do. And frankly, I probably wouldn't be as critical of it as you are. Doesn't matter. We don't have time left for that debate. But the point is this. People today, frankly, of both parties, want to know that their leaders are going to be fighting for them and they have their interests first. Not some faraway land like Ukraine and not some global corporation, but they want to know that their backyard and their community and their interests and their way of life are being protected and fought for. And folks like Pence and a number of others are missing that point, and they miss it. They may miss it all the way to defeat next November.
And just one more point, Chris, I want to make, and that is the policies of America First foreign policy, a protective trade policy, controlling immigration. Those are long traditional conservative positions. Right. And in fact, the foreign policy and trade policy that Pence and Nikki Haley are advocating have more in common with progressives like Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt than they do with conservatives.
We yes, and we have explored that, and
yes.
No argument right here. I think even if you take the trade, tariff, and maybe even the foreign policy thing and set it to the side for just a moment, I think there's another underlying idea here is populism is sort of a buzzword, sort of a code word for, the kinds of people that we don't want governing us like Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. It's like you should reject the folks that are quote unquote populist so that you can have the elites that know better governing you. And, I absolutely reject that. And it feels like in some ways it's a way to not just cut off populism, but actually true philosophical conservatism within the Republican Party or the right of center movement in an effort to try and create a much more centrist party. And that's ground that I think there's a whole lot of folks that are willing to stand fight on that ground.
Yeah. There are populists on the left. I mean,
sure.
Yeah, but to completely dismiss, as he did, is completely...
Well, first of all, dismiss either right before or right after taking credit for 4 years of a...
Right, okay. And Vice President Pence is pretty good at sliding in and out of that, I was vice president with the administration that did X and Y, but boy, when it's time to call out, the person he actually served with, he doesn't have any problem with that either.
Voters want their leaders to fight for them. They want to know that they're on their side and have their interests. And that's
and
about
if they
it.
don't, they'll find somebody that will.
Yeah.
And when that element becomes a free agent, there'll be somebody on the other side of the spectrum. They'll be out there preaching to the things that matter to them.
I would argue that conservative nationalism, America First, is more on the side of the founders than what Pence is peddling.
And I would argue it's more on the side of a majority of Americans.
Yes, absolutely.
That if you take away the labels and actually sit down with the average American and explain what this is and how it works, I think those ideas actually are majority positions.
Yeah.
But we'll see. All right. Well, wow.
I don't know that I trust us to take on any more topics today.
Really?
I feel like we're kind of getting warmed up and we might go too far the next one. Okay. So let's just...
All right. The our leader here has said that we have reached the end, John. So I didn't know what to expect when we came in here. The pre-production meeting was a little tepid, and then you had really what are a lot of notes. Do you feel satisfied that we got it all covered today?
I do. I mean, I'd like to talk more about this Pence stuff, but it's an interesting debate, and I think it's a debate we should be having. But I just think that he is distorting true conservatism.
Yeah, I think maybe to close that then is let's plan on doing sort of a, where are the factions inside of, I don't want to call it the Republican Party. I mean, the right of center in this country. And what are those movements, and sort of to put a little bit of framework around that. I think we could do that, John. I think we could pull that off.
Yeah.
All right.
I think
The
that'd be
people are
fun.
asking for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, very good.
The people have spoken.
The people have spoken. We'll give them what they want. All right, gentlemen. Thank you very much. We're glad to be back with you again today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends. Leave us a positive review. And with all of that, we will see you next time on ITR Live.